Hi, this is Peter Schweizer, and welcome to the Drill Down. From Qatar to Qvar, we cover it all. Of course, Qatar is that tiny kingdom in the Middle East that gets in the news for a lot of bad reasons. Qvar is an inhaler prescription drug that will cost $289 in the United States, but only $9 in Germany. How are these two disparate topics related, and how are they connected to Donald Trump? We're going to talk about that today with Eric Eggers, the co-host of this program. Eric Eggers, how are you?
Have you been snorting Qvar or Qatar without my knowledge? That's my first question, because I know you can afford the U.S. versions. I think these do seem to be different, but I do think from a larger, big picture perspective, they're related in this sense. So Donald Trump's announcement that he is going to, via executive order, attempt to undertake something that hasn't been done previously is significant, I think, as much for what it says about Donald Trump's ability to stand up for what makes sense despite the headwinds of special interests. And so we're going to talk about his executive order about the pharmaceuticals in that context. And that matters because this Qatari airplane gift is seen in a negative light because it suggests the opposite about Donald Trump. It suggests he's very susceptible to being influenced by
it's concerning.
Foreign gifts.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to view them both in that context. And can both be true? Is one more true than the other? And so we're going to just evaluate those in light of what they say about the U.S. government, what appears to be wrong versus what actually moves the needle.
Yeah, and well, look, let's start with the prescription drug prices, which I think I actually like Trump's approach because the traditional way that people want to deal with drug prices, they want price controls. And when you put price controls on something, what happens? You get scarcity because the companies can't afford to make money. He explained it in a recent clip. Listen to Donald Trump's explanation of what the executive order does and why it's important.
But starting today, the United States will no longer subsidize the health care of foreign countries, which is what we were doing. We're subsidizing others' health care. Countries where they paid a small fraction of what for the same drug that what we pay many, many times more for, and will no longer tolerate profiteering and price gouging from Big Pharma. But again, it was really the countries that forced Big Pharma to do things that, frankly, I'm not sure they really felt comfortable doing, but they've gotten away with it, these countries. European Union has been brutal.
Yeah, and here's what I like about Trump's approach, by the way. Look, we've been critics of Big Pharma. We've talked about it on this podcast. But I also think there are people who want government-controlled health care, people like Bernie Sanders, even Robert Kennedy Jr., the Secretary of HHS, says Europe does it better with bigger government. That approach doesn't work. If you look at pharmaceutical companies and their profits, they go up and down depending on which drugs they have coming out. They make big investments in these products. And Trump's approach is to say, look, this is kind of like the situation with NATO, right? Everybody says you want to have a strong national defense, but Europe and other countries said, well, you guys pay more, we'll pay less, and we've let them get away with it. The same thing is happening, I think, in the prescription drug space, which is pharmaceutical companies can charge us more. They don't fight Europeans as much to get higher prices because their profits here are so high, and we are, in fact, subsidizing Europe's prescription drug and that needs to end, and this executive order will hopefully do that.
And it needs to end, and they would say it's a status quo that has existed at the expense of the American citizen, the American person who has to consume drugs. Donald Trump said in his post on Truth Social, which we'll also talk about in the context of the ability to foreign influence, he said that pharmaceutical drug companies would say for years that it was research and development costs and that all these costs were and would be for no reason whatsoever borne by suckers of America alone, he writes. Campaign contributions can do wonders, but not with me and not with the Republican Party. We're going to do the right thing, something that the Democrats have fought for many years. And that's, to me, the other piece of this story that's a big deal. So listen to this clip. This is a Democrat member of Congress on Jon Stewart's podcast, and they're actually talking about this issue. This came out last week, and they were talking about how not a lot gets done in Congress because of the status quo. And what we exist to do here and have done for 12 plus years at the Government Accountability Institute, we say, hey, here's the status quo. Everyone seems to agree it should fix or should change. How come it's not? And it's because people make money off the status quo. Listen to what he said about this issue specifically last week.
But it also, why have we not been able to fix a lot of big things for so many years? So Donald Trump, when he first was elected president in 2016, before he became president, said, these pharmaceutical drug companies, they're getting away with murder, these guys. The way they charge so much more in America than they charge in other countries. Mm-hmm. And then when it came time to do a law to negotiate prescription drug prices, it was no longer a priority for him. I think that that'll come back soon because people want to start saving money in Medicaid and Medicare and negotiating drug prices using the purchasing power of the U.S. government, the largest drug purchaser in the world, through Medicare and Medicaid, using our power to negotiate prices will save us a lot of money. So it's such common sense. We passed a bill in the Biden administration where, we can negotiate the price of 10 drugs. 10 drugs. I mean, we should be doing this with all the drugs.
Yeah, it was insane. But that gets us to the crux of the conversation, which is this. Is the dysfunction within the Congress what leads to the opening for a more populist leader like Trump to bypass it through the executive actions? In other words, is the failure of Congress to understand how to effectively deliver for the people that are outside the Beltway and not the lobbyists, is that how the ground is seeded for someone to come in and go, screw all this, I'm going to bypass all this complexity and deliver directly, even if it's very much on the fringes of what may be for the Constitution?
So I think that clip matters for a couple different reasons. And I apologize to our listeners who now have been subjected in back-to-back weeks to a clip from Pod Save America and now the Jon Stewart podcast. Like next week, we're going to just burn patchouli and eat tofu. But I do think it's worth listening to what other people that are inclined differently politically think about this, because in this case, they agree with what Donald Trump just did. And they would also even applaud the reasons and methodology, for and how he did it. He did it because the status quo, the pharmaceutical industry is too powerful. They're going to keep this thing from happening. It was a big win for Biden to negotiate 10 drugs. Donald Trump, in his first term, did an executive order that said they tied overseas prices to 50 Medicare drugs, and then that got struck down because he did it the same way. So we'll see what happens this way. But the reality is, he's like, look, man, Congress isn't getting it done. Everybody agrees that this is a common sense thing to do. Diabetes medicine costs $600 in this country, $70 in Switzerland, $35 in Japan. That doesn't make any sense. Everyone's like, you're right, it doesn't make any sense. Well, how come you don't do anything about it? Well.
Yeah, you're right. And there's a lot of lobbying dollars sloshing around D.C. Pharma spends more than really any other industry. People talk about big oil. Pharma spends more in lobbying. You also have the issue of campaign contributions. They also spend a lot of money on media outlets. I mean, how many times do you watch cable news and you see those ads for all kinds of medications? So there's a lot of people that are invested in big pharma doing well. But the other part of Congress is you got guys like Bernie Sanders, AOC, Chuck Schumer, who really don't want a private healthcare system. They want government-run healthcare. They want to sort of kill the goose that has laid the golden egg, all this innovation and all these great new medicines and technologies we've got. So that's why you have a standstill in Congress. What's really smart about Trump's approach, I like, is think about what Joe Biden did and how hard it took him, how long and how hard it took him to do. He negotiated, 10 different pharmaceutical prices, over the period of time. What Trump is saying, we're not going to negotiate it with you. We're just going to see what is the average price that other industrialized companies are paying, and that he names the countries, and we're going to pay that price. So he doesn't even have to negotiate it. The U.S. government doesn't even have to negotiate it. It's going to be done based on the negotiations that Big Pharma does with other entities. That's very, very smart. You don't get bogged down into the details in this trench warfare with pharma about how much it costs to produce a drug. That's why I think it's a great, great idea. But I do share the point. I'm not sure it's constitutional. I'm not sure that Trump can do this by executive order. I think Congress is going to have to pass a law, and hopefully they will do that.
Well, to quote Donald Trump's top legal scholar, Constitution schmonstitution, okay? We're just getting stuff done. No, I do think, it is, I think, just worth noting that the status quo that was permitted, and I love hearing Jon Stewart and that Democrat member of Congress sneer at the idea that it was a big deal for Joe Biden's administration to get 10 drugs negotiated. Right. And I also love your your NATO analogy, which has been echoed, I think, by the FDA chair, because it's not meant to be punitive to Big Pharma.
Right.
We're not saying you guys have been price gouging in the United States necessarily, although a study showed that in 2022, U.S. prices across all drugs, brands and generics, were like 2.78 times as high as prices in comparison countries. Over 3 times as high. And this is across the board. It doesn't matter if it's a blood thinner, if it's an inhaler. It's consistently just dramatically higher, which is crazy when you consider a lot of these companies are American companies. And so it's wild that the American consumer has been essentially subsidizing lower costs for healthcare across the world. And so what Donald Trump's saying is, listen, you guys want to make your money, that's your business, but you're not going to charge Americans more than you're charging anybody else.
You're not going to do it on the back of on the back of Americans, which is what they've done. And look, I think that Big Pharma has lots of problems. We've talked about it. I also think, look, you can't on the one time bash Big Pharma, on the other hand say, why don't we have a drug that fixes cancer? The two are actually related. You need to have pharmaceutical companies researching in these areas. The problem is we should not be the ones that are doing it because the rest of Europe and the rest of the Western world doesn't want to pay full prices. That's just not acceptable anymore.
So here I am. I'm seeing this news about this pharmaceutical executive order. I'm like, man, look at Donald Trump. He's standing up for the American people. It's very much like the tariff discussion, I think. He's like, look, he's willing to take on hard fights, and he's willing to say that it's whatever's been is, actually, ironically, what do we make fun of Kamala Harris for saying all the time? We'll be unburdened by what has been. That's literally Donald Trump's policies on so many things. I don't care how we did it before. This is how we're doing it now. I don't care what these trade imbalances are. And then I see this story about that we're going to accept a plane from the nation of Qatar. Now, the Wall Street Journal wrote, Mr. Trump's plan to take the Qatari jet, it's a $400 million plane. It's going to replace Air Force One, and we'll talk about the reasons for that. But the Wall Street Journal's no big fan. They use it in this context. They say it's a political gift to Democrats. The GOP objected rightly and loudly to Hunter Biden's influence peddling abroad while his father was in high office, followed by his selling art at inflated prices while President Biden sat in the White House. And those are all true things. Now, the Wall Street Journal says the Trump family is making much more money in opaque sales of crypto coins, while Mr. Trump says it's simply good sense to accept a free jumbo jet from Qatari bearing gifts.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot there. Let's start with the plane, first of all. I also think it's a mistake, but I also think to compare it to the Hunter Biden situation is silly. What we know about the plane is this. The Kingdom of Qatar, has said, we will gift you this plane. It's worth $400 million, and we'll talk in a second about whether this is actually going to happen, because I don't think it is. But the plan is that they're going to gift it to the U.S. Department of Defense, which operates Air Force One. So this is not a gift to Trump. Trump is not going to leave when he leaves office in January 2029 and bring the jet with him. There has been some talk that Trump would love to have a plane at his library one day, just like Ronald Reagan has Air Force One at his.
And can you go on the plane?
You can go on the plane. You can tour it. You can look at it. You can see what Air Force One is like. But the point is that is on permanent loan to a presidential library. So, some of the news reporting has been Trump's going to take the plane. He's going to fly around on this Qatari plane when he leaves the White House. Absurd. Nobody's talking about that. Trump has shot that down. But here's why it's a bad idea. First of all, it's Qatar, right? Qatar has a long history. In fact, in the first Trump administration, Donald Trump called them a terror-sponsoring state. And last time I checked, Hamas still had its headquarters in Qatar. They give a lot of money to American universities. There are always strings attached. They always want them to espouse more extreme versions of Islamist thought than you find in other parts of the world. So that's the source of where this is coming from is a problem. Here's the second issue, which nobody has really focused on, and that's the whole security aspect of this. We had a problem a few years ago where the Chinese were selling laptop computers, and we were the IBM ThinkPads. Used to be made by IBM. They sold it to a Chinese company, and the Pentagon was buying them. And they found that embedded in one of the really small, tiny chips, there was a slight modification that allowed the Chinese to eavesdrop on what was happening on that laptop. Do you know how complicated a massive Boeing jet is, the size of a 747? Massively complicated. Before the president started using this thing, they're going to have to take it apart and make sure there are no bugs, there are no flaws, there are no faults. And then after that, the plane is not the main part of this. The main part of this is all the electronics, all the security, all the things that go with Air Force One that makes Air Force One completely different than any other Boeing plane. So the idea that this thing is going to be ready to go in a couple of months and Trump's just going to is absolutely absurd. So I think it was a terrible idea to accept it. I think he's probably doing it because he's there right now trying to get them and other Middle Eastern companies to invest more in our country. But I don't think it's going to happen. I think this is much ado about nothing.
Well, breaking news, teetotal and Peter Schweizer over here, the president of the Government Accountability Institute, thinks a $400 million foreign gift to the president of the United States is a bad idea. Let's just say my view on this is a little more nuanced, Peter Schweizer.
You're the man of nuance, as we all know.
Well, listen, I mean, as Donald Trump likes to say, if somebody's going to give you a putt, you take the putt. It would be stupid to putt it out, you miss, which I think speaks to like what Donald Trump is used to getting on the golf course. If a $400 million plane, he just is like giving somebody give him a 2-foot
But
putt.
Here's the question. If somebody gives you a free putt, and you have reason to believe that may be one of those exploding balls, are you really going to make that putt? I mean, my point is look who it's coming from. I know the gesture, but the chances that this thing has bugs in it, eavesdropping devices are massive. And it's not like the movies where you can just kind of sweep it. Oh, we spent 20 minutes sweeping it. There are no bugs here.
Well, you said something earlier, so let's just do this. Let's take a step back. First off, this is something that Donald Trump signaled was going to happen 3 months ago. On February 20th, he held a press conference on his plane, and nobody raised a big deal about it then. And he said, listen, Boeing is messing up. And he goes, it's been chronically delayed. He renegotiated the price. They're on the hook for 2 more planes, 2 more Air Force Ones. I think it was supposed to be something like in the neighborhood of $5 billion. Trump renegotiated to $4 billion, and it's at fixed cost. So once you've exceeded this cost, then Boeing's going to eat it, and apparently Boeing's been eating it. And this is just another in a long line of bad looks. And Donald Trump said, listen, Boeing can't get it done. We may have to go look somewhere else. We may have to go. I'm not going to buy a different plane from a foreign company. He goes, but we may go to foreign countries, and I may look to see if they can have a used one we can refurbish, or we'll just get one, is his quote. And that appears to be exactly what he's doing. He's getting one.
You can't get an Air Force One. That's my
point. Well, that's what you say. But he appears to be doing just that. But I do think, so he said he was going to do it. I think it's also interesting that like if it wasn't Qatar, if it was like France that was giving us this plane, would we have as big of a problem with it? And the people on the left, I mean, there's plenty of people on the right that are raising concerns. I think it's perfectly valid to raise questions and raise concerns. But the people on the left that are raising all the hell about, oh man, Qatar's doing this. Where were you when Qatar has given, you said, a lot of money to U.S. universities? Like, let's put the zeros on that number. Qatar has donated $6 billion to U.S. universities. So it's okay for academia to take Qatar's money.
Oh, yeah, Harvard takes it, right?
Yeah, Harvard takes a ton of it. So does Columbia. The Qatari capital is called Education City, or the Qatari it's home to what's called Education City, which has an outpost of Northwestern's journalism school, Georgetown's foreign policy school. Cornell built a medical school there, and so we talk about $6 billion over the last 40 years. $2 billion has come in between 2021 and 2024. So Qatar has been ramping up their efforts. They obviously hosted a World Cup, which who knows how much money they spent to get that bad boy.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting that other people will take Qatar's money, and it seems to be okay then.
Those are for educational purposes.
So literally it's for educational purposes. But to me, the big loser on this is Boeing, right? And I think the fact that Trump is forced to then have to go out and take a plane from somebody who is home to Hamas, because an American company, after failing to bring their own astronauts home, can't then deliver on the contract to deliver planes to get America's president around the world safely, is a bad look. And I think it's indicative of the conditions they've gotten used to. And that's another thing that Donald Trump is changing. And the reason why I think it's important to view those stories together is if Donald Trump is willing to stand up to what's considered to be one of the most powerful lobbying forces in the United States, which is Big Pharma. I mean, again, they're so powerful. We're one of only 2 countries in the world that allow them to advertise their drugs on our television. Okay, the United States and New Zealand, the only 2 countries that do that. So they can get that. But Donald Trump's saying, look, we're done with this. then I think you got to give him a little bit of credit, and maybe a $400 million plane is not going to be like, oh man, now we're just going to do whatever they want.
I just think that the potential upside as he sees it in fixing the problem, I think that the downside is much larger. And I also think, too, we're going to be looking more at this going forward. I also think, too, the issues of, business deals that the Trump family is looking at or has secured in the Middle East is more concerning in the sense that it involves personal enrichment. It's not a plane gifted to the federal government. I will say, and we are going to monitor this, and we'll be talking about this more on the podcast, I will say that thus far what I've seen does not rise to the Hunter Biden level. And here's why. If you look at like Trump, I think they just announced they're going to be building a resort in Qatar, right?
$5.5 billion resort. They're using a Saudi Arabian company, but they're also working with a company called Qatari DR, which is owned by the government of Qatar, which appears to violate what they said would be one of their ramifications of not working directly with foreign governments.
Yeah. That's a problem and concerning. One of the differences, I would say, however, is that this is a business that Trump have been in for decades, right? They built hotels and golf courses around the world. Should they be doing this deal? I don't think they should, no. Hunter Biden did not have a legitimate business. He started his quote-unquote financial business after his dad became vice president, never really performed any service, never provided any products or anything. So it is concerning. I do think that it's always important to keep in mind when these foreign governments strike deals with American political figures, whether it's Donald Trump or whoever, they're looking for things in return. Right? They're doing it not just because it's a good business deal. They're doing it because they want to have political favor, and they think it's going to gain them political favor. And that's why I think it's not just a bad look. I think it's a bad approach to be doing these kinds of deals in these countries.
It's odd, though. I mean, we kind of don't have a model for what to do with a businessman who becomes president. I mean, Donald Trump owns Truth Social. We talked about that earlier. Truth Social is obviously a company that relies on advertising dollars and other things. So, I mean, what do you do about that? There are business relationships that exist.
The business relationships in general bother me less than when you're dealing with foreign governments, especially, again, you mentioned like Japan or France. If you're doing deals in the UK or in France or, maybe even South Korea, that's fine. But when you're doing deals in China, Russia, Ukraine, as in the case of Hunter Biden, or you're doing deals in the Middle East, you're not just doing deals with businessmen. You're doing deals with foreign governments that want things from you. And you can say, I can withstand all the pressure. Nothing's going to happen. I don't think anybody can be completely confident in saying that's true, that there's not going to be some moment of time when you feel a certain sense of gratitude or they call in a chit and you decide to honor it. It just creates too many temptations. I think it's a terrible idea, and it's something we're going to be monitoring here in the months ahead.
You think it's a terrible idea. You know who I well, it's Joe Biden. Because I don't think you can fully explain why Joe Biden is now coming back into the national spotlight, is showing up on The View. I mean, if to do what else than to send a signal to world leaders like, hey,
I'm available.
I'm around. No, I mean seriously, we have you know more than anybody else how integral Joe Biden's public relevance is to his personal fortune, his
100%.
family's personal fortune. And Mark Halperin made that point on his podcast last week. That's a big family to have to deal with, and that family's gotten used to it. I mean, a lot of grandkids and a lot of, and you got uncles. I mean, James and Frank, and then
he's got
Hunter.
bills to pay, as Bill Clinton once said. I've got bills to pay,
and he's discovering in real time what it's like when you're not around. And so it's funny that we're talking about is Donald Trump doing too much business with too many foreign governments and doing too many things? Yeah. Meanwhile, Joe Biden's like, Joe Biden is available.
I'm looking for just about anything. Well, we appreciate you, as always, taking the time to listen to this podcast. We know your time is valuable. We hope that you will check out our research at thedrilldown.com, and we hope that you will consider subscribing to this podcast wherever you can subscribe to find podcasts. Thanks again. Until next time.